My own children's betrayal. They didn't invite me to their weddings and vanished for 8 years. I've lived in St. Louis, Missouri, for most of my adult life. My name is Richard, and I'm 55 years old. For as long as I can remember, sports have been my passion. That's why I spent 2 decades working as a high school baseball coach, even if it didn't offer the world's greatest paycheck. My wife, Linda, is 52. She and I got married young, and for years, we did our best to support each other despite the financial ups and downs. We have 2 adult children, David and Emma, both in their late 20s. David lives with his wife in Chicago, and Emma settled in Kansas City with her husband shortly after college. They left home one by one, each time leaving the house a little quieter. Although I missed the days when they were small and running around in the backyard, I was also proud to see them take charge of their own lives. Linda and I used to get along pretty well, or at least that's how I remember it during our earlier years. But somewhere along the line, the weight of constant money worries began to take its toll. With my career as a coach, I've never had a high salary. I earned enough to pay the bills most of the time, but there was rarely any extra for vacations or spontaneous purchases. Meanwhile, Linda worked for a while in retail but eventually quit, saying it was too stressful and didn't pay enough to warrant the effort. We tried to balance the household on just my income, and for a while we managed, especially when our kids still lived at home. We made do with secondhand furniture, clipped coupons to cut grocery costs, and sometimes borrowed from friends if an unexpected expense popped up. But once David and Emma moved out and started their own families, something shifted. Maybe Linda felt we'd lost our sense of purpose with the kids gone, or maybe she was tired of the constant struggle to make ends meet. In any case, the arguments became more frequent. She'd say I wasn't trying hard enough, that I should find a higher-paying job or even switch careers. She hated that our savings account was practically empty at the end of each month. Sometimes I'd consider her points seriously, wondering if I really was being too stubborn by sticking to coaching. But the truth is, I love the sport. Baseball has been the only profession where I feel truly fulfilled, as though I'm making a difference in young people's lives. Linda didn't see it that way. She believed our family deserved a bigger house, better cars, and a more comfortable lifestyle. We'd bicker about everything from groceries to utility bills, constantly pointing fingers at each other. The tension only grew stronger once our children were out of the picture. There was no buffer anymore, no reason to pretend like everything was fine. So by the time Linda began voicing real frustration and disappointment in me, I wasn't even shocked. I was just tired of defending the work I love and tired of feeling like my best effort was never enough. Little did I know that this cycle of anger and resentment was leading us both toward a much deeper fracture, one that would ultimately test all the bonds we had left. I found out about Linda's affair on a chilly Sunday afternoon, the kind of day where everything feels a bit gray and subdued. I had come home early from a practice session at the high school, expecting little more than a quiet evening and a quick dinner. Instead, I walked into a conversation I was never meant to hear. Linda was on the phone in our living room, laughing in a way I hadn't heard in years, speaking low and intimately. When she turned around and saw me, her face blanched. She hastily ended the call, and all I remember is how my heart began pounding in my ears. It was a moment of silent understanding. She knew I knew. In the days that followed, Linda tried to dismiss it as just talking or innocent flirting, but the pieces quickly fell into place. She admitted it was with an old college friend named Mark, a man she had reconnected with during a class reunion. The more I pressed, the more the truth spilled out. They had been involved for nearly a year, meeting up regularly whenever Mark visited St. Louis for business. The revelation cut me deeper than I ever expected. Although our marriage had been on the rocks, I never thought Linda would go as far as to start a full-blown affair. I felt betrayed not just by her actions, but by how long she had kept me in the dark. Any lingering hope of salvaging our fractured relationship seemed to vanish the moment she confessed. Without hesitation, I filed for divorce. Even before the affair came to light, our marriage had felt like a sinking ship. We were always at each other's throats, constantly struggling over finances and daily responsibilities. But discovering she'd been lying to me for a year, that was the final nail in the coffin. I remember sitting in my car outside the courthouse, divorce papers clutched in my hands, feeling a strange combination of anger and relief. It hurt. How could it not? Yet I also felt that a weight had been lifted, like I was finally done pretending this could still work. What I didn't anticipate was the reaction from David and Emma. When they got wind of the impending divorce, my kids both reached out to me, but not in the way I had hoped. Instead of support, I got pleas for forgiveness on Linda's behalf. "Dad," Emma said over the phone, "Mom's had a tough time. She's been lonely and depressed. Don't throw away everything you've built together." David echoed the same sentiment, telling me Linda had been under so much stress, and that maybe we needed counseling rather than a courtroom. Their words left me both astonished and incensed. Had they already forgotten the years of tension and financial struggles that Linda and I had tried and failed to navigate? Did they think an entire year of deception could be brushed off as just a bad phase? I felt betrayed by my own children, as though they were minimizing the hurt that Linda's secret relationship had caused. I tried explaining how I felt, how deeply I'd been wronged, but they insisted I should at least consider giving her a second chance. Their stance drove a wedge between us, igniting bitter arguments that only fueled my resolve to proceed with the divorce. In my mind, the marriage was beyond repair, and Linda's affair was proof enough that we had reached the point of no return. When David and Emma first got back in touch, I admit there was a flicker of hope. I'd been missing them for so long that I was desperate to believe they truly wanted to reconcile. However, that hope began to crumble the moment they started steering every conversation toward money. It began innocently enough. They'd ask how the sports facility was doing, how much expansion I was planning, and whether I had thought about investing in any other ventures. But their questions quickly escalated into suggestions, thinly veiled pleas for financial assistance. I soon pieced together the real story from a few family members who were less guarded. Mark's business had been going downhill for months. He ran a small manufacturing company that supplied specialized equipment for local firms, but the market had shifted, leaving him with dwindling contracts and rising debts. David and Emma, both employed at Mark's company in roles he had created for them, were facing job insecurity. Worse yet, if Mark decided to sell the business, they'd lose not just their positions but also any easy path to upward mobility they had banked on. It seems that after all these years, they had discovered the truth. I was now the one on solid financial ground, not Mark. The day I finally confronted them about it, they acted surprised, as though they had never intended to use me for money. Emma went on about how they just wanted me to be part of their lives again, how they wished I could see my grandchildren more often. David echoed her sentiment, claiming he had always planned to reach out, even if I hadn't launched a successful facility. Their words rang hollow. It was the exact same feeling I'd had the day I heard Linda on the phone with Mark. The realization that someone I loved was lying straight to my face. Unable to stomach the half-truths and manipulations, I made a decision I never imagined making with my own children. I blocked their numbers and social media accounts. That act weighed heavily on my conscience. After all, they're still my kids. Yet, I couldn't continue opening myself up to more pain if their only goal was to squeeze me for cash. In my mind, the matter was settled. I'd lived through enough betrayal already. But David and Emma refused to let things end there. One afternoon at the facility, they showed up unannounced, and they brought the grandkids. The front desk staff was taken aback. We don't typically allow random visitors into our training zones, especially during session hours. Determined to avoid a scene in front of clients, I led them to my office. That's when the confrontation began. Emma insisted I was overreacting, pointing to the kids and saying, "Dad, they deserve to know their grandfather." David chimed in that they only wanted a chance to mend fences. Their claims might have tugged at my heartstrings if the entire approach didn't feel so staged. They'd never once invited me to meet my grandchildren before, shutting me out under the pretense that having both me and their mom in the same space would be too awkward. Now suddenly, they were bursting through my doors, grandkids in tow, expecting me to forget everything and let them in with open arms. As they pleaded, my anger flared. I told them point blank that if they were trying to buy my forgiveness by parading my grandchildren around, it wouldn't work. Their explanations tumbled out in a chaotic mix of excuses, but I'd heard enough. After a heated argument, I asked them to leave and made it clear that I wouldn't hesitate to call security if they caused any further disturbance. They left in a flurry of angry words, their kids confused and upset by the turmoil. In that moment, I felt both regret and a sense of grim resolve. Cutting off my own children was excruciating, but letting them exploit me again would have been worse. Over the next few days, I tried to piece together my feelings about everything that had happened. The anger and hurt from David and Emma's unexpected visit still lingered, but there was something deeper gnawing at me, an unsettling realization that they had strategically used my grandchildren to play on my emotions. After all, why else would they have arrived out of the blue, children in tow, demanding an instant reconciliation at my workplace? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. They saw my grandkids as the perfect tool to lower my guard. In the midst of my confusion, a cousin reached out with some news. She'd spoken to Emma, and apparently Emma had admitted that both she and David had leaned heavily on their stepfather, Mark, because of the financial stability he once promised. They'd built their futures on Mark's company, anticipating promotions, bigger salaries, and a life of relative ease. But as his business began to falter, so did their confidence in him. This revelation pulled into focus what I'd suspected all along. My children's renewed interest in me wasn't merely about rediscovering a long-lost father. It was a calculated shift in allegiance. A few days later, David sent a lengthy email confirming much of what I'd heard. He and Emma had realized Mark's company was on the verge of being sold or shuttered, and neither of them had enough savings to weather the fallout. David mentioned the idea of launching their own startup in the hopes of regaining a secure income. That's when he finally came clean. "Dad, we hoped you could help fund it. We know you're doing well with the sports facility." His words were carefully chosen, as though acknowledging their earlier behavior but also implying that I should overlook it for the sake of family. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but I knew exactly how to respond. I refused to provide any financial support. Over the years, I'd poured myself into relationships that only led to betrayal, first with Linda, now with my kids. I couldn't bear the idea of becoming a victim to the same pattern once again. My answer to David was firm and final. I wouldn't invest in their business, pay off debts, or act as a safety net for them. Money couldn't patch up years of broken trust. Of course, my refusal didn't go over well. Word got back that David and Emma were furious, calling me bitter and unforgiving. Some relatives wondered if I was being too harsh, suggesting I should at least spare something for the grandchildren's sake. But I knew I had to preserve my dignity. If I caved in now, I'd be signing myself up for another cycle of manipulation. Yet, making that choice brought its own kind of pain. I've always longed for a close-knit family, and no matter how strained our relationships were, David and Emma are still my children. Nevertheless, I realized that regaining my self-respect meant keeping a certain distance. I wouldn't rule out the possibility of reconciliation one day, but it would have to be on genuine terms, ones that recognized my humanity and not just my wallet. Until then, I would hold onto the life I'd rebuilt, determined to protect my hard-won sense of dignity. Even if it meant standing alone, I was caught off guard one morning when I saw 2 new emails in my inbox. One from David and one from Emma. We hadn't been in contact for several weeks, especially after I'd made it clear that I wasn't going to finance their business ambitions. Part of me dreaded opening those messages, expecting another round of pleas or justifications. Instead, what I found was a pair of heartfelt apologies. They each wrote that they'd taken time to reflect on our arguments and realized how hurtful their approach had been, particularly when they'd shown up at my workplace with the grandchildren. David admitted that relying on Mark's company had been a mistake. He confessed that he and Emma had felt secure there and never truly considered how I might feel, seeing them so quick to side with Linda and Mark after the divorce. Emma echoed the sentiment, writing that she should have been more understanding and less dismissive of my feelings. Both emails were longer and more honest than any conversation we'd had in the past year. While I couldn't be sure of their motives entirely, their words felt more sincere than before. Taking a day to consider my response, I crafted a careful but open reply. I thanked them for their apologies and acknowledged that I still cared about them, despite everything that had gone wrong. However, I also made it clear that the door I was opening was not an invitation for financial assistance. If they wanted to rebuild our family ties, I would be glad to meet under normal, personal circumstances. No talk of business, loans, or investments. My message ended with a straightforward proposition. Let's have dinner at my home this Saturday. Bring your spouses, and yes, please bring the grandchildren. But understand, I am not your bankroll, and if that's all you're after, I'd rather know now. By Thursday afternoon, both David and Emma had agreed to come over for dinner. I won't lie, I was nervous. I spent most of Friday tidying up the house, making sure the place was comfortable for visitors, especially those as young as my grandchildren. The last time David and Emma had been inside these walls, it felt tense and uncertain. This time, I wanted a different atmosphere, one that signaled new beginnings rather than old resentments. On Saturday evening, they arrived in separate cars. David came with his wife, Denise, and their 2 children, energetic little ones who stared at me with wide-eyed curiosity. Emma brought her husband, Luke, along with their toddler. Watching them pour into my living room, I realized how much I'd missed in their lives. Birthdays, special moments, milestones. And yet, the air didn't feel quite as thick as I'd feared. We exchanged somewhat awkward hugs, and the grandchildren's innocent excitement broke the ice more effectively than any of us adults could have managed. Dinner was surprisingly relaxed. Conversations flowed from casual topics, David's new job hunt, Emma's interest in freelance writing, to the grandkids' favorite TV shows. Nobody mentioned Mark or Linda, and no one brought up business plans. It was as if we collectively decided to leave those issues outside. By the time dessert was served, the children had scattered around the living room with some old board games I dug out of storage. Their laughter and tiny voices echoed in a space that had seemed so empty in recent years. When they left that night, we all shared a sense that something had shifted, maybe for the better. I don't expect a miraculous transformation overnight, but I do feel hopeful. We've since set another date to meet at a nearby park, a simple family picnic. While I remain cautious, keeping my personal boundaries firmly in place, I'm allowing myself to envision a future where I can be an active part of my grandchildren's lives and forge a more genuine relationship with David and Emma. Perhaps the biggest change is in me. I've learned I can stand up for my own dignity and still leave room for reconciliation. Rebuilding our family won't happen in a single meal or a single day, but I'm ready to try. This time, with honesty and clear limits, I have faith that we can make progress without reopening old wounds. If nothing else, I can finally see a glimmer of the family bond one once thought I'd lost forever, and I'm determined to let it grow in a healthier way than before.